Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We're coming to you live on February 3rd, 2026. If anybody is an NLC webinar first timer in the room today, know that our Cathedra webinars get their name from the Creek word for learning. And today you're going to be learning about developing engagement plans for clean energy projects. This is part 3 of a 4-part series specializing on connections and conflicts between cultural and traditional tribal values and project environmental impacts. You'll be learning from your instructors, Michelle L. Holliday and Catherine Cole. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're so happy that you can tune in for the webinar today. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law printed here. This is just a friendly reminder that the materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. If you'd like to go back and watch part 1 or 2 of the series, you can find that here on the courses section under developing engagement plans for clean energy projects. And if you want to tune in for a webinar in the future, hopefully part 4 at least, then you can join by clicking on that green banner at the top of the screen. Whenever we have a live webinar happening, you'll see that green banner, but you can log into the website at any point to check out all the different courses we have for you in the courses section. We do ask that you join with listen-only capabilities just because we are recording the webinar, so it helps to cut down on audio feedback. And if you've joined and you found the sound is coming out of the device that you're not really trying to hear it from, maybe you're trying to use your earbuds, maybe you're trying to use a Bluetooth speaker, whatever you're trying to use, if you go down to the bottom of your screen where I have a telephone icon, you might have a headset icon. But if you click on that, it'll bring up a list of speaker devices and you can select the right audio output. Even though we ask that you join on mute for the sake of the recording, we do still, of course, want to encourage class participation. We want to know your questions. We want to know your comments. If there's any tech support issues that I could help you navigate through, we are going to rely on the public chat primarily for that. If you don't yet have it expanded, you can go up to the messages column in gray. It's to the left-hand side of your screen. Click on public chat, and that will open up a chat between you, the rest of the attendees, me, the NLC staff, and your instructors, Michelle and Kit. Whatever you want to ask or say, you could just come down here to send message to public chat, type it in, and then you can either hit enter or you can select the little paper airplane button, and that'll send it in where everyone can see it. We do also have the shared notes feature. If you open that, you can find a list of helpful links, like a link to today's presentation slides, a link to the webinar feedback survey, a link where you can register to receive our email blasts so that you know when future webinars are happening, all that good stuff. And I did already put a link to the presentation slides in the chat, but I'll do so once again if you want to have those opening while they're going through their presentation. If you did join but you're unmuted, it's not a problem. You can always just mute yourself by clicking on the mic icon. That'll only show up if you did join with mic capabilities. And then if you think we missed a comment or a question along the way, you can always use that hand raise feature that's all the way to the bottom right of your screen. We would love if you got the chat box going together now by introducing yourselves. It's nice to see who all is present in the webinar. You can let us know your name, where you're tuning in from, your work or your role in Indian country that might have led you to today's webinar, or you might just be here for personal information, and your tribal affiliation. You might be a tribal employee and you don't have your own affiliation. That is okay too. You are also welcome. And while y'all are introducing yourselves in the chat, I do just have a quick final advisory, we'll say. You do want to avoid clicking on this red menu column that's to the very far left of your screen. If you don't have it expanded, you might just see the icons that are to the left. But just know that if you click on that, it's going to immediately pull you out of the webinar and it's going to take you to whatever you selected on the menu. You can always just rejoin by clicking the green banner, but it can be kind of jarring. So I just want to give you a heads up. All right, y'all. While you're introducing yourselves in the chat, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructors, Michelle Holliday and Catherine Cole. And Kit, I have made you presenter now.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. Those of you on the East Coast, like Michelle Holliday, I hope you're staying warm. Thank you for putting your information in the chat, where you're from, what your role is. I put mine in there just as an example if you needed a reminder. And we're glad to see all of you.
I think we're just waiting for them to.
Yep.
I do know one. I know someone from Montana that's online.
Excellent. Jonathan Berry's from Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, I remember Jonathan.
Good to see you, Jonathan.
Conference.
Excellent.
This week in Florida.
Allison. Allison, let
me
know if I'm saying
Barbara.
that right. Yep. Rachel.
Oh, great. Washington State. Yeah, they're having their NCA AT&I conference this week up in your part of the country right now.
And Michelle and I were just in Florida presenting at the NLC conference. And it sounds like, Michelle, we got out of there before Florida got cold. I'm putting it in quotes. Only because
Yeah.
I think it's actually really, really cold where you are.
I think we have a couple more people typing in, which is great for introducing yourselves. And if you're from a tribe, I'd like to know that.
All right. So good to see everybody. And Brooke says, our blood is thin. We are not built for this. I know. I'm in Los Angeles. We're not built for it either.
I think Wendell is typing and Ivory. So we're here with you for the next 90 minutes. And I'm happy that you've joined us. Okay. Another one from Washington State. Great.
Yeah. Yakima Nation.
Yakima the Pueblo. Awesome.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. So Michelle, this is our third webinar. Hard to believe it. We're doing a 4-part webinar series. This is webinar 3. Webinar 4 is going to come up, I think, in April. And the title for this webinar is Developing Engagement Plans for Clean Energy Projects, Connections and Conflict Between Cultural and Traditional Tribal Values and Project Environmental Impacts. And we're glad to have you all here. And I bet you're interested in this because you're doing some work that relates to it. So our learning objectives today, framing project impacts within the context of cultural and traditional tribal values, environmental and cultural concerns and processes for resolving conflicts. We're going to talk a lot about conflict resolution in the next webinar. So if you've got conflict top of mind, be great if you joined us for the next webinar, and you can watch this one and that one once we have it on the recording in the NLC library. And then emphasizing community empowerment and ownership. So that's a perspective that Michelle and I take with all of our projects, and in particular, projects with tribes. So Michelle, do you want to just talk a little bit about who you are?
Thank you. Thank you, Kit. Welcome, everybody. I'm a member of the Iowa Tribe of Oklahoma, and my Indian name is Nashte Pimi. Nashte means good heart, and Pimi means lady. And that name was bestowed to me by one of our Iowa elders, tribal elected official who I admired and was able to receive that name. And then, of course, in certain tribes, you have to live that name in the best way you can, and what that comes with that. So sometimes I just really try to work with everyone and have a good heart in the things that we do. And oftentimes we know some of these names are sometimes difficult because sometimes they don't want to be a good heart. But in that regard, we think about this in the context of this webinar in our series, that when we come into conflict, right, and how we sort of look at things, and we look at it in the context of, energy development on tribal land. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. And then just to give you context about myself, I've been working in the energy industry for over 25 years. Either my experience has been in the industry working for a utility and a holding company in California. That's where Kit and I began our energy backgrounds, and I've been a woman-owned native business for 14 years in this space. And I have worked with tribes in different ways, in their feasibility work early on, in their planning development. I've worked with developers that have projects on tribal lands, and working with them collaboratively in terms of governmental affair and public affair work outside of the reservation. I have a client actually now I'm working with pretty closely, and with organizations across the country, being a strategic advisor. So I just keep on this path because energy is a long endeavor, and starting that path and understanding it. And I think achieving tribes' energy sovereignty in the way they want to do that, I support that and work holistically. So there's a little bit more in what we've written here, but I just wanted to kind of express that to you, and I'll hand it over to Kit.
Thanks, Michelle. I get the pleasure of working with Michelle on a regular basis, and I love working with Michelle. Her Indian name is absolutely correct. She is a good heart lady. I live and work in California and have a consulting firm that specializes in working with communities that are nearby either actual industrial development like landfills or transmission lines, battery energy storage projects, proposed or actually built infrastructure. So I work in both the project development and in the space where the project is already existing. And I just call it angry neighbors, working with angry neighbors. So that's my specialty. I teach at USC. I have a doctorate in public policy and community development. All right.
Yeah, so I think Kit kind of hit on item 5. We both have worked with in the renewable area with mining clients and with battery energy storage system clients. We have done that collectively and also individually. So I just wanted to emphasize that point that in I would say I'm a practitioner in the work of project development, energy development with tribes, but then also just generally energy projects. And so the focus, I think, for this and what we do, Kit and I in our consultancies, is really part of it is like the public participation process. And part of that in my role, I'm located in the Washington, D.C. area, and did a lot of work in the utility and the holding company space about engagement with federal agencies. And so as we're talking about siting and permitting, siting processes, we do have engagement strategies for federal, state, local, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think wanted to just sort of emphasize about these communication and engagement strategies for these tribal projects and working with these external stakeholders that are not on the reservation. And we have always focused also on educating them on tribal sovereignty, right, or tribal energy sovereignty. And so we really do try to execute at a level that is intensive sometimes, conflictive at times. And so this session, will be an interesting one. And we really hope that by example, by our own experiences, why our clients trust us, because some of this is you learn by experience. And so that's why I talk about practitioner. So we hope that if you're in a planning phase or in project work, this could be relevant to not only clean energy projects, projects overall for infrastructure development. So keep that in mind as we're sort of going through this. And then I think if we go back, Kit, to the next slide, you can kind of give the context to, or the next slide for the webinar too.
Sure. Folks. You bet. So some of you were with us during webinar 2. This is webinar 3. We're glad to see you. Whether you've been part of the series or not, doesn't matter. Now that you're here with us right at this moment, we will get you up to speed, and then we will move your understanding and knowledge forward. So just a quick review of webinar number 2. We did it in December, which now feels like a million years ago to me, maybe to the rest of you too. But it really was about knowing your interested parties. Who are folks who are going to be interested in your renewable energy project or just your project generally? Some of you may be working on renewable energy and housing. Some of you may be working on different kinds of infrastructure for tribes. But you always have people who are interested in the project, folks who are inside the tribe, the tribal council, the tribal committees, elders, youth groups, and cultural leaders are some examples. Folks who are outside the tribe. That could include folks like cities that are near tribal lands, chambers of commerce, utilities that are providing some kind of services or water, electrical services to the tribe and to the tribal lands. And so thinking about who are those folks who care about your project inside the tribe and outside the tribe was what we really focused on in December. And for those of you joining today, as we're going through the webinar today, just think about for yourself and your project, who might be inside and outside the tribe interested in what it is you're doing.
Yeah, I think in the webinar 1, when you go back, and thank you, Brooke, for putting the recordings in, we really focused on the development of the stakeholder mapping exercise and the matrix and the preparation of that in webinar 1. So we tried to relate that again to where you are at in your development process. And you may not even be starting a project on tribal land. You may be at the feasibility stage or preparing a grant. All this is relevant to understanding as you embark on an energy project. And a lot of that was focused on the goal. And then webinar 2 was what was the goal? What is the issue? And then what is that communication? So we had some exercises that we participated with everyone online, and we will be sort of doing the same thing today for webinar 3.
So Michelle, I'm going to go to the next slide in a second, but you and I have worked on many projects where there are stakeholders or shareholders or interested parties who are our clients, some of whom are external developers outside of the tribes, have just not considered. And I'm just thinking of one that you and I worked on in Eastern California, in the Eastern Sierra, where the tribe was sort of the last thought that client had. There was a tribe that was nearby the proposed work site, and that didn't go that well. So I just wanted to bring that up as a sort of a real world example that Michelle and I have worked on, where knowing your interested parties is really key to project success.
Yeah, I noticed some others folks joined, Melinda and Rom, and I think Jelani. So we opened up. So welcome. We'd like to know where you're from, or if you're with a tribe, as we're sort of going through our webinar. So welcome, and glad you could join us.
This is one of our most favorite slides. So some of you may be working on these clean energy projects. You can see that right here in the middle of the slide. And then you have folks who could be outside of the tribe, folks who are ranchers, farmers, growers, fire and police in the nearby city or county. And then on this side, you have folks who also have an interest in the project. And here are some examples of those folks inside the tribe. who may have an interest in the project or just want to know about it, right?
Yeah, I think the slide, we put this infographic together to sort of let you know, these are potential stakeholders that could be part of your project, interested parties that are on the reservation as well. And so giving you an idea about as you're developing your plan or working with your, of course, all of these stakeholders may or may not have an interest in your project, but clearly we sort of went through that. So
yep.
Just giving, and of course we know every reservation is different and have different issues. And so we know that, and then you can apply that to your project.
And given all the projects that you and I have worked on, Michelle, we put this infographic together just trying to capture those big categories of folks who might care about those projects. All right. So
yes,
do you want to talk? Oh,
yeah,
please.
Yeah. Thank you, Kit. What we wanted to sort of develop in this webinar is, as we know, when you accept grants, a lot of tribes accept grants, there's certain conditions with that. And those conditions are because you're taking federal funding, right? And so we just wanted to raise those regulations and laws that have to be compliant with energy development. The two, letting you know, NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, and then the National Historic Preservation Act, NHPA, which is for on the Section 106 reviews. We're not really going to go into that, but I did want to touch upon the tribal environmental regulations for the tribe, because we're talking to you as participants as if you were managing a tribal project and tribal energy project on your land, and how you're going to address these issues around the cultural and environmental concerns that are on the reservation. And I think when we think about, if you aren't familiar and you're in this position of navigating this for your own tribe, you know, tribes have their own tribal environmental regulations. A lot of that focus in those regulations or codes are around the natural resource protection, water and air quality management, solid waste, protections of sacred sites and cultural resources. And then I think I wanted to make a point about the sustainable landscapes. I think we've heard a lot about that. And all that kind of is around some of these federal regulations, but tribes have their own. So if you're not familiar, natural resources director, you or in your general counsel or legal, looking at those regulations are really important as you're working with your developer to look at that. And this is when I talk about the areas of tribal environmental authority. These are the regulations of the authority that you have to adhere to, have to be thought about as you're working on your project plan or your infrastructure development, and adhering to those regulations and codes. I think the requirements are key in taking the time to sort of do your work. We'll get more into mitigation approaches, but that's really taking the cultural knowledge that your tribe or the tribe you're working for or with, and then how you integrate that into or balance into your tribal energy project development work. I think we can go to the next slide, Kit.
Great. So when we think about environmental impacts and issues, one of the things to think about as you're working on your projects is the potential environmental impacts of your project, and also specific stakeholders who care about your project, who might be particularly concerned about certain types of environmental impacts and issues. And we've certainly worked with a lot of projects and a lot of clients where there's certain folks who have very particular concerns about projects. Some folks have concerns about projects in general. So just as a quick example, I'm working on a quarry up in Northern California. And one of the environmental impacts that stakeholders are concerned about is the impact on butterflies. There's some threatened and federally listed butterflies in the area, and they're concerned about the impact of a potential quarry expansion on these butterflies. So as we're talking through the webinar, it's great to just think for yourself and your project, who are the stakeholders and what is it that they really care about in terms of potential environmental impacts?
As we're talking about cultural traditions and tribal energy sovereignty, I think tribes, each tribe, tribal energy sovereignty, I think I say that it refers to the tribe's right to control and develop and manage their resources, their energy resources on tribal land. And I think when we look at the first bullet about tribal energy sovereignty and the cultural considerations, there will be community divisions because you're definitely, you have to sort of acknowledge that, and then how do you address that? And I think the tribe has that authority to really move forward clean energy projects. And I'm talking about the leadership, right? The tribal leadership, or if there's a champion, and perhaps you're a project manager, or perhaps you're in a situation, a grant writer, or if you're a natural resources director, you're put in that position for oversee or to move forward with the tribal council or the business committee, their desire to move forward with an energy project. And I think sometimes, how do we do that, right? And if you don't have the energy knowledge, and that's why good partners, aligning yourself and doing your homework around history with developers or EPCs that have done some work in Indian country, or EPCs that want to work with tribes. I think part of that is these clean energy projects and infrastructure development. It exists. It always exists. It's never really going to ever go away. And so then how do you develop an acceptable clean energy project on tribal land? And sometimes these locations are critical. The siting and permitting process is really critical. And understanding and having the focus of being an active listener as you're going out and having the engagement, your engagement strategy, having your one-on-ones, having your what we recommend small group interactions. You really have to have an understanding of that, the communities. And again, we're just highlighting here on our points about hieroglyphic, I can't say that, petroglyphs, and then also the locations, which we'll get more into. But there is this dynamic when you're going to bring anyone on to do development. Are they going to respect and integrate and change the type of work that you're doing on tribal lands, and having the balance there?
Michelle, I was just thinking about that third bullet, locations have meaning that may not be evident to others. And I think you and I have worked for a number of developers that see the land that they own or that they want to own or they're leasing as their land, and as their land that they can do with as they want. And that it can be hard for those clients to reconcile the fact that some of this land may have meaning to tribes that are nearby, or maybe not nearby, even though the tribe isn't living on that particular piece of land and may not be on that piece of land regularly even. That's something that I have watched you in action with some of our developer clients, trying to explain to them why this is important for them to take into account, that this location has meaning to a tribe that is not immediately evident to the developer?
Yeah, I think everyone who's on this webinar, and if you're in that situation, you're sort of like communicating with the tribe and the tribal communities, but you're also educating the developer to a certain extent, depending on what they have or what their knowledge is, working with tribes. And then moving forward, and we always, what's the three words, Kit, that we talk about in terms of project development?
Oh, scope, schedule, budget.
What is it again?
Scope, schedule, and budget. Here, I'll put it in the chat. Scope,
very important. Scope, schedule, and budget, because these are economic development projects that have a certain amount of money, or you've gone out. So you have to manage the project, and managing the project is also a component of the engagement aspect, not just only of equipment and bonding and managing, your agreements, or if it's an interconnection agreement. It's these stakeholders that you're dealing with, it's very sophisticated. So it is this aspect that we wanted to emphasize in this webinar is probably the most overlooked. But yeah, we'll figure it out. But I feel like it really needs more attention in terms of your engagement strategy. And so we'll go into the next slide and talk a little bit more about this infographic that we had put together. And so I wanted to sort of, as we've identified these areas of concern or cultural concern, I think there's sort of 3 points I kind of wanted to talk about the conflict between energy and cultural preservation in tribal communities. And really, when we look at these we look at the infographic where we're talking about the impacts. Some impacts could be on ceremonial grounds, traditional plant gathering, these sacred view sheds that are compromised. And I think we hear a lot about that. And even in the last administration, solar development, not so much this time, because of course we know the federal funding and the change of that approach, but we're still addressing and trying to protect those lands by external extractive resources that want to go on federal land, or also tribal or near and adjacent to tribal land that are like on ancestral land. That's important. But it's all about the development, and we're focusing, and we wanted to highlight that in terms of how do you navigate that space if you are working on a project. And I think also the second point I wanted to convey was like these land use conflicts. And again, these conflicts can be around traditional hunting and gathering versus how you're building your energy infrastructure. So sometimes you can go on a reservation and, there's vast, but what you don't really know until you do and you visit and have your engagement strategy to identify, the water, right? Or these migratory paths, these medicinal plants that are very important in terms of our cultural waves for tribal communities, and the two-legged and four-legged friends that are on the reservation that we have great respect and have either symbolic or cultural significance in them living there on the lands, or how they are continued in the environment. Also the insects, all of those things are really important. And I think as you're sort of working through these projects, it's balancing the priorities and how you balance the priorities of economic development plans that is supporting tribal energy sovereignty. You hear that terminology, with cultural priorities and practices. So I think we'll talk more and we will have an exercise, but I can't emphasize that is it a black or white? No, there's a lot of gray, and how you come into managing the conflict, addressing the issues, and having a mitigating strategy and approach to at the very beginning of your plan in your siting and permitting. If you don't kick that off with all of these cultural considerations, you will have a delay, which will again impact the scope,
schedule, and budget. It absolutely, Michelle. I just put that in the chat. Environmental and cultural considerations can impact your project's scope, schedule, and budget. And you know, I hate to sound corporate, but you and I, Michelle, have seen so many projects in our long careers go off track because there wasn't enough consideration given to the environmental and cultural impacts of the proposed project. Or someone thought about the environmental and cultural impacts, but they thought about them too late or didn't communicate about them effectively. And then the project gets derailed or delayed. Please.
When we were talking and when we were going over webinar 2 and we were talking about issue identification, in the first webinar, we talked about stakeholder mapping. When you look at these considerations and you step back, and if you watch, go back and listen to the webinars, there are stakeholders that are part of all of these considerations that you have to think about as you're mapping out your stakeholders, mapping out the issues, these cultural considerations or environmental or land issues, and then again, your mitigation measures, your next steps to addressing that as you're sort of moving forward to getting a sense to move forward your project. And again, we are not talking about a developer. You are opposing a development that's not on tribal land. We are talking in this webinar, if you are working on a tribal energy project on tribal land, these are these considerations that impact you, impact your project, and how in the tribal community or communities, how are you going to address these and work with your developer and being able to have those clear communication methodology or how you address those in information, and we'll talk about the methods. But this is can be very controversial, and often some projects don't go forward because of these things. So we're not talking about advocates, tribal, we as Native people opposing a project. You are thinking that and you're on here, that's great, but I'm saying that we as tribal people get in those positions where leadership wants to move forward with the project, or project team, or part of the community development division, and you want to communicate, and you don't have the technical knowledge. Well, then you provide and then you get the resources so that you can be better to, or working with your developer to go forward to tribal council to explain to them how you're going to address these, and that's acceptable for tribal council or the economic development business or company that's on the tribal land that's moving forward these projects. Let's go to the next slide. Let's start to engage, Kit.
Okay, great. So if everybody could go to the chat, we know that tribes have different environmental and cultural concerns, and that all of you today probably have different kinds of projects, although maybe all sort of in the energy space. If you could go to the chat and put in just a couple words about when you think about your project, what kinds of environmental and cultural concerns could emerge with your project. Some of you may have had environmental and cultural concerns already emerge, and you're dealing with them in real time today. That's great. You can put those in there too. Those of you who are imagining what the cultural concerns could be, also great. So please put in the chat. We can have a little conversation. It helps us to understand what you're faced with so that we can, on this webinar, help you as much as possible.
Yeah, I think we also had Ted. Ted joined. Welcome, Ted. We're asking everybody where are you coming from into the webinar. Welcome, and I think there's someone from the Rancheria, Grayton Rancheria. Candace. So even if you're not working on a project, or you're learning more, we would like you to have some kind of comment around what you're thinking about, your thoughts about the webinar as well.
So Jonathan said solar, there's lots of concerns with disruption of wildlife migration. Yes, that's a great example. I'm just going to back up here for a second to this slide. So we've got migratory paths here. So Jonathan, you get an A+ on that one. And Candace, absolutely, impacts to natural water sources. So we have ephemeral waterways here, but also permanent waterways, permanent water sources, springs, things like that. Ted Hernandez, thank you. So Ted, you're working on, it looks like solar and microgrid. I'm wondering if, please, Michelle, sorry.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just like, that's great.
Yeah, that is great. So Ted, is anybody bringing up environmental considerations regarding your solar and microgrid projects? Maybe you haven't rolled those out, so you haven't heard any considerations or concerns, but what would you imagine folks might have concerns about?
Yeah, I think if you want to read Wendell's comment, it says what?
And then wetland impacts from our friends at the Grayton Rancheria. So Wendell, it says we had a similar project on our Pueblo lands. We had a problem with older tribal members and younger generation tribal members. I'm so glad you put this in the chat. The final outcome was to not move forward with the project due to all the issues that were brought up. I don't know, Wendell, if you're in a place where you can unmute yourself if you want to share just a little bit more about what folks were specifically concerned about relative to the impacts of the project. And if you can't unmute, it's no problem.
It looks like he's typing again.
Okay, good. So I think, Michelle, you and I have seen again and again the perspectives that older tribal members have and younger tribal members, and sometimes they're not aligned, right?
Yeah. Well, I think also in the youth, there is a very much focus of environmental protection. And then you have up against economic development opportunities that the tribe sees in terms of energy development. But yeah, it could be very conflictive. I think for Grayton Rancheria, those grid, I think it's grid resiliency allocations, finding qualified projects. That's GDO. I think if you're doing the grid, I don't know if it's the same grant, but it's the grid resiliency where you're trying to ensure that you're, not having outages and moving forward with the funds that have been allocated for like a 5-year allocation. That's a very tough grant. I'm working with the tribe right now, and they're trying to determine if they're becoming a tribal utility authority in order to set up a small project to show that they can generate energy, so therefore that they can be able to bring in those resources to do an upgrade to an emergency response center. But the statutes in the language of the grant are very specific. And so if you're going to work with an incumbent provider or utility or service provider, and you directly work with them, the 100% cost share goes directly, and the incumbents don't want to take on if you do it yourself, if this is the grant you're talking about, there's a 30% cost share for the tribe. So we had talked earlier about tribal regulation and authority, and setting up your systems in the past is really critical for some of these grants, the DOE, at least the grid resiliency one, if that's what you're talking about. So identifying a small project, a solar parking, to be able to demonstrate that. So it's an approach. I can just give you a very high level of looking at that. Grid is 90% and has to be sub-awarded out. Exactly. But if the tribe sets up their authority and you read through the regulations, if you do it, then it's 30%. Otherwise, it's pretty expensive. It's difficult. Tribes are across the country having problems with that.
And Wendell, thanks for sharing a little bit more information about the environmental and cultural considerations that were coming up with the project that you were working on. So it looks like water and cultural sites were part of that, part of the considerations that maybe folks couldn't come together on to agree on. A solar farm, yep, and tribal ranchers fought it because of grazing rights. Yep, absolutely makes sense. Again, we're talking about environmental and cultural considerations, but what Wendell's bringing up is, again, these stakeholders. So we've got ranchers here, and our stakeholder infographic, we've absolutely seen the influence that ranchers have as it relates to renewable energy projects.
Katrina has a very interesting comment that you'd want to share, Kit.
Sure. So the Northwest American Indian Coalition in Southwest Oregon, working through possible offshore wind development, with our area being identified as a possible lease area. And there's community concerns, Katrina, in your comments, with marine impacts, nearshore cultural impacts, and sacred view sheds. And Katrina, I think this is just a tremendous example of, you can see stakeholders here on that infographic, but the environmental and cultural considerations, you could just substitute on the clean energy project wind here in the middle. And stakeholders have a variety of potential considerations and concerns, it sounds like. I don't know, Katrina, if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself, and if you'd like to share just a little bit more about what's happening for you in Southwest Oregon. It's always helpful for folks on the webinar to hear us talk about real life projects. So Katrina might not be in a place where she can unmute. There's no problem. Looking for unmute button. I gotcha. It's underneath the slide and it looks like a microphone. And usually you'll hit it and then a ghostly voice will say you've been unmuted. We're not doing as much offshore wind development here in California as we were before. But certainly up in Humboldt County, offshore wind development has had a number of environmental and cultural considerations and concerns. And a large number of stakeholders being engaged in the project. Okay, so Katrina, it looks like your unmute button is isn't there, so no problem.
I'm putting something in the chat for her about an upcoming offshore wind forum that's being hosted by the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy. It's coming up in April. And California tribes from the East Coast are coming in. It's supported by philanthropy under the Alliance to learn more about offshore wind. So if you're interested, I've put my email and I can connect you with the people, with the team that they're working on. So offshore wind is still pretty active and is interesting. Some tribes are like yourself, wanting to know more about it, and then also learning about the actual application and what are those impacts. So I think you may find that of interest if you would like to know more. Did we read all the comments? Was there anything else?
I'm just looking.
A lot of stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's been so great about commenting. Thank you so much. No, because your contribution in the chat and in the webinar helps other people too. So whatever problems or challenges you're having, I bet you your colleagues and your fellow webinar goers are having them as well. And I was laughing, Michelle, because it isn't funny, but I was reading Candace's comment. We're in an area where we only have one power company, and they're in no hurry to return our calls when we're requesting information. And I'm sorry that I was laughing. That's not funny, but both Michelle and I have worked for Southern California Edison, which is big electrical utility in Southern California. So I was just identifying with this. Not only can it be hard for tribes to connect with whatever utility has the monopoly, but it can also be hard for people inside that utility to help you, because sometimes, as Michelle and I know, as former utility employees, sometimes your hands are tied in terms of the degree to which you can communicate with folks outside of the organization. That's sort of a funny, quirky thing about utilities. And Great and Rancheria said, same issue here for our IOU. Biggest player in our region doesn't want to work on grid projects.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you for your input there. And
yeah, it was really great.
About, like I said, sometimes these projects, I just want to emphasize, tribal energy development is not easy. It wasn't easy 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Like, it takes a long time. I think in this decade, I should say, or going forward, I think developers are a little bit more sensitive to looking at tribes, only because of these strategic locations of tribes, wanting to work with tribes. But then I think also, as tribes have more of an interest in energy development, how do they go about that? And I think this webinar is, when you're talking and having these conversations, the stark reality of development and what it takes, and the type of commitment, right? It's not a 2-year commitment and then the tribal council changes, and then you don't have a sponsor. A lot of times the project goes away, but we're really looking at decades of a commitment. I think the tribal leadership definitely has a focus on gaming and casino operations, looking now at our energy storage systems backup. We're looking at climate issues of severe weather conditions that have been facing across the country. So energy has elevated its priority, I think, in tribal communities. And so with that elevating those issues, you still have to deal with these cultural concerns and the natural resources and the preservation of the cultural components, but at the same time addressing, ensuring that you have electricity. So if the electricity goes out, do you have a center that is going to take care of your tribal community? So I think some of these conversations are changing in the siting and permitting of development and the justification for that. But, to be assured, that is the balance of the priorities when you're looking at new construction I know, Kit, you were going to talk a little bit about this, but I'll let you continue on with this. But I just wanted to make that a point that Kit will sort of talk more about. Is I think it's a positive thing, but again, positive in that the justification and reason to have these projects move forward are more valid, but it's still quite expensive, right? It's an expensive endeavor for a tribe to sort of pursue that. But I think in the need of your communities and ensuring that you have power or emergency response centers, operating centers. More tribes are talking about that, but then we're also talking about data centers and the impacts, or data centers on tribal lands. So we won't talk about data centers today, but when you go back to the infographic, Kit, we're talking about traditional clean energy projects, but when you start to think about really hyperscale projects, you really have to think about these environmental and cultural considerations and the long-term effect that it could have. So I think it's like, again, really talked a lot about, but the reality of these projects and the engagement that's required and understanding of what these projects mean is it's just an ongoing learning process for Indian. But I'll let you go back to the slide, Kit, as we continue on our webinar.
Absolutely. I just wanted to comment on Great and Rancheria. Our friends there shared in the chat how to balance the need for a new energy project installation. I think, Michelle, you're speaking about this, on culturally sensitive project site locations. That's a beautiful summary of what we're talking about today. Absolutely. How to balance that, right? The need for predictable, count-onable energy for the tribe, specifically focused on energy sovereignty, and then the potential conflicts that the environmental and cultural considerations bring up. So we just want you to know you're not alone. This is a challenge, and it's a challenge for lots of folks, as we can see, because y'all are joining the webinar today. So we talked a little bit in this slide about some of the environmental and cultural considerations. I just wanted to talk for 1 second about some of the other kinds of considerations developing in undeveloped natural areas, projects that can result in the introduction of incongruent visual, audio, atmospheric changes, things like cell phone towers, radio towers, noise, sound, dust created by the project construction, created by the road that's being used during construction for entrance and egress. Perhaps that road, once the project is constructed, won't be used that much, but while the project's being constructed, there's a lot of traffic on that road, and that can impact folks who are living and working nearby. And then clearing the land could disturb traditional herbal medicinal plants and animals. I think, Michelle, when you and I were presenting in Fort Lauderdale last week at the NLC conference, someone put in the chat our non-human relatives, which I thought was a great way to summarize and characterize all of those beings that might be impacted by a proposed project.
I think there's a comment by Wendell that I think it's important to sort of speak to, Kit.
Sure. So Wendell says, our Pueblo has its own electric company. Amazing. Our problem when we built our substation, we had to cross private, state, and county lands. And the private landowners wanted outrageous prices for trespass. So we had to go out of our way to run our power line to the Pueblo. Yeah. So it's not only dealing with tribal members. Yes.
Exactly. 100%. And when we talked about in our first webinar, going back to the stakeholders, the stakeholder slide on the infographic, what we're finding more and more with tribal development is you're having to have your engagement plans not only for the tribe within it, which I mentioned earlier, but external. And that's some of the work that Kit and I really do a lot of, explaining, cultivating the relationships, because one, they don't understand tribes or what the tribe wants to do, or the tribe or the pueblo is not really integrated in the community that they are around. There are some tribes that are doing that, and they make a conscious effort to cultivate those, being good neighbors. But a lot of times it is very divisive. There are even with the city and county, we have environmental groups that are opposing tribal projects with the developer, because they have concerns on environmental air emittance. I'm working with a project right now where I'm working with the developer and the tribe, and they're going to work together collaboratively to address these issues. They're elevating the issues, but they really don't understand about tribal sovereignty. And so to move forward their exercise of tribal energy sovereignty, right? They're causing a lot of concerns. And these concerns are not elders. These are the youth generation that Wendell was talking about in his chat, that more and more you will face those kinds of external stakeholders that feel that they have an opinion on tribal lands. And although it's not private land or county land or federal land, they're very aggressive in terms of their position. And I think more and more tribes are facing that as well in their engagement strategies or their plans. And again, it's not just energy, sometimes it's others, and these historical disgruntled individuals that either don't like the tribe either, and they see the development. It is just a really weird and awkward place sometimes in tribal energy development, that we're raising these concerns so that at least you can be aware of it, you can articulate it in your meetings and your discussions internally with leadership and management and with developers, because you can't just now ignore it, right? It's not, you can't not, you do have to have some kind of engagement strategy. We're not proposing on this webinar to say we're doing the sort of process and the framework, but every tribe has their decisions and recommendations on how they approach it. And hopefully this will, as we're sort of going through the next slide on the examples, we can sort of help you think about your process in terms of mitigating alternatives. Of course, when you're going to be doing infrastructure project by federal funds, there will be an environmental clearance or environmental review that you have to conduct. Depending on the federal agency, it depends on how they want to approach it and what kind of report, and making sure that when you look at the grant process that you add enough funding to hire a consultant or hire an environmental firm to work with you to ensure that you're meeting the compliance requirements, and all the alternatives that come into a NEPA review. Or if it is also with your tribal regulations, there may be some specifics about how you look at alternative locations so that you have done your work in terms of a successful siting of a potential project. But as we talked about the stakeholder, now we're talking about the impact. So one of the examples we have, there's a project of a viewshed of a sacred site for prayer and ceremony. I think people can understand that. And so we're saying, as alternatives in your engagement plan, you need to work with the TIPO to look at where are these alternative locations and working with your developer on your parcels of land, or also working with your planning. If the tribe has a master plan of their land and their resources, is there an industrial zone that's been zoned? Some tribes do have that. Is that an alignment to an alternative location for a utility scale solar project? But all of the factors that the developer will have you look at is where is the connection to the distribution to the transmission so that you can export that into the grid. There are all of these factors not, I don't know, sometimes TIPLs will we don't want any development. But again, council with the planning director or the planning department with the TIPO, these are the engagement and the meetings that you need to have internally to talk about what those mitigation measures possibly could be with your developer partner, or if you're leading that or not, considerations in how you do that and what is acceptable. Maybe you move it. Maybe it's a smaller project. There are different mitigation. But clearly, I think we hear a lot in the media about these view sheds and how they're obstructed and how they do not want to be impacted. I can tell you that in private and federal land development, I worked with a developer on ancestral lands where tribes have also the authority to weigh in on Section 106 review on tribal consultation in the public participation process. We're talking not on tribal land, off tribal land. You do have to engage in those consultations to raise those, and the federal agency or the Bureau of Land Management does have to incorporate that into their plan. What are those alternatives? They have to look at alternatives. On tribal land, again, it's different for each tribe, but clearly you should sort of have that in mind in terms of your mitigation alternatives. I don't know if you can take the second one.
Well, I'm just thinking, Michelle, about how we organize this, you and I, for ourselves. And we like to be very clear on the impacts and then the potential alternatives or mitigations. So we just essentially took a slide and a table from one of the projects that we've worked on as an example for you. So I know Roger who's joined us today, has used our stakeholder matrix in his work on his projects. This is another example of a matrix that you can use in your work to help you be organized about what the potential impacts are, and are there any potential alternatives or mitigations that could be explored. It's always, at least for me, working on these projects, helpful to understand, is there a possibility of moving the project? Is there a possibility of fencing it? Is there a possibility of having it be designed differently so we're not shearing off the top of a mountain or a hill? So really, when you're thinking about these impacts, putting your impacts in a matrix and looking at potential alternatives and mitigations can be helpful just for you to get organized around where it is you might need to focus on your project, to keep it on scope, schedule, budget. These kinds of things are the things that derail projects all the time. And we see it, I'm sure you all see it as well, where you think you've considered all the impacts, or you've thought about potential impacts and what you could do to address it. And then someone comes forward bringing up another potential impact that you hadn't considered. Michelle's nodding her head. So Michelle, please go ahead.
Well, I wanted to say the second one, we were talking of the middle of a migratory for animals. That's what I was, I didn't want to continue to be repetitious in my presentation, my comments. I was trying to Kit also has experience where we have to sort of work on these issues and help the client facilitate finding, and then the final webinar will talk about how you come to resolution to some of these, or not, but there's a process in which we come to a resolution to move forward certain projects and certain issues. But we wanted to let you know this is a process about the migratory paths. I know that a lot of you have been put in the chat about natural resources, more so, natural resource, and then also cultural preservation. But when you're looking at, we can't move a migratory path, right? We can't move like where animals, we try to really not try to impact paths where animals reside on the reservation. So it is very interesting how tribes, and they can be creative too, but as we know, these are very sensitive. So, we were talking about, the fencing. That is potentially a mitigation. It's not the end all be all, but then also we find out when you're in a project, the project got approved and we're still moving forward with the construction, there are a lot of other issues that arise with disturbance of the land. And we didn't go into great detail of that, but I have been where we've had to shut down projects for Section 106 reviews, and I've had to coordinate with a variety of tribes. This was a transmission project in California and Arizona. The coal community, and like know who all folks are, and also the ceremonies or the culture of how in which certain tribes deal with remains or verify remains. Again, going to the TIPO or to the cultural committee is very important, but I think a lot of it is this egress, ingress. It's just the work of the construction that come into in your engagement strategies as well. We haven't really talked a lot about that in terms of when you get a project and you're moving forward. But I think also those complaints that come from the tribal community, and it may not be clean energy as well, maybe your takeaways on that, ensuring that you work with the crews to make sure that you address those issues. And a lot of it is also dealing with dust, impacting, the tribal community and also operations, noise, all of those things come in. So we're again, maybe it's a schedule, giving them notification of when these activities are occurring, being cognizant that if there is times of ceremony, working that into your cost schedule of your planning schedule, not to build or not to construct during those times of the season, that these activities. So we're just sort of sharing that. I think when you're setting up your stakeholder maybe dealing with issue, then you're thinking about what are the mitigation and alternatives. Then the other component is what is your communication strategy? What is your method, right? Not everybody watches or looks at social media. On-one communications, maybe it's hosting coffee connects. We sort of look at how you best get the information out to your tribal communities to address these issues. In this case, we're talking solar project. I think there are what I would call hybrid solutions where you incorporate your tribal values with your practices. And just leaving that as a thought as consideration. And next slide, Kit.
So now y'all get to do a little bit of work. If you can take a moment, if you have a pen and a piece of paper, or if you're on your computer, think about some of the impacts that your project could have or is having, and some potential ways to maybe mitigate that impact, or an alternative, potentially a different site for the project. If you could just put in the chat some of the impacts, and I'll put some in for some of the projects that I've worked on.
Yeah, and I wanted to say thank you everybody for staying on with us. We're coming into the close of 15 minutes of our webinar, and I think these types of exercises that we're trying to work with you on the webinar, we want to have you unmute so we could have a dialogue, but I think if you're able to put in an example of an impact, we'll be sort of, trying to help you connecting, the stakeholder mapping and the issue identification as you're actually implementing an engagement plan, right? When we're talking about how you integrate that into your infrastructure project. So
anyone who wants to unmute or can unmute, and if you'd like to share some of the impacts, if you'd like to put those in the chat. Certainly, we've talked a lot about different impacts today, but I know there are impacts that you're experiencing or you're experiencing with your projects that we haven't discussed, that we haven't considered. So any sharing that anyone is comfortable doing is a really great contribution to the rest of the group.
If we were really kind of like sophisticated webinar people or podcasters, we put our music on and then like mute, and then you guys can think. But we
like the Jeopardy music, like the da 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 da.
So, it's kind of like it's quiet, but be quiet and let people think. But we're just sort of, having a conversation with you all. And I know that wherever you're at, I hope you, appreciate how we're trying best to sort of give you some takeaways off of this webinar that are practical ways of engagement. And you're learning. We're learning together. We're sharing information, and these types of issues. They're difficult issues, and
Roger,
the practitioners, we can't go, oh yeah, do this. We can just show you a process to do it, and then you have to work at it. You have to work about cultivating these relationships. You have to work with the TIPO that may not want development, and then you have to work with the economic development director that's wanting this project because the council wanted it. These are the balance that you do with clean energy projects on tribal land. People don't talk about that. They talk about, oh, we're going to build a BESS. And then, okay, well, how big is the BESS? What's the BESS curve? But it's like, how are you going to develop and construct the BESS beyond the money?
And how are you going to get it on scope, schedule, budget if there's community members who have big concerns about it? Roger, did you want to hop in? We'd love to hear about your experience.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. As I shared at the conference last week, I got the stakeholder matrix or shareholder matrix back, had some really good things, had some overlapping from the different categories, areas, and was sharing with someone who was sharing with me how to approach a tribal council. I have a meeting at the end of this month with the tribal council. Mm-hmm. And two things that he brought up. One was, we always talk about environmental sustainability, but he said a big thing is cultural sustainability. Mm-hmm. And I'd never heard the term cultural sustainability. And so I thought that was very interesting. And one of the things along that, we're looking at planting switchgrass on land, pasture land that they have. And he said, what you may want to think about would be mowing an area out into the, not super far out into the field, but and then making a circle where they can have a ceremony, where they can walk out and have a ceremony before it's harvested, and that may mean. And so, I hadn't thought about that. So just having that, and I talked to the grower and I said, look, how do you feel about this? And he goes, something like that, I don't mind. I don't want them driving all the way out and, across a 100-acre field and whatnot. He said, the thing you have to remember is what you cut down, I can't harvest. And when you're paid by what you harvest and the weight that comes off, just understand that may have an impact on what you estimate you're going to get. And so, but then, this is a decision that they have to make, not that I make. And so, but anyway, I just wanted to share that. I thought it was very interesting. And sorry I was late this afternoon.
No apology necessary.
We're not grading you, but I do think this is again continued learning with the Native Learning Center and these webinars, and the content is really great. So I think, you can always go back, Roger, and listen to the beginning that you missed. But I really do appreciate your comment and participation and applying the application of the engagement strategy and finding some success in it, but then also learning more. So, okay, what do you do now? What do you do with that information? And you're going back, and it's just a continuous monitoring, continuous getting the project moving. And that's where the engagement strategy, the engagement work is not stopping from the planning to getting a grant, planning of getting the grant awarded and communicating what the project going to be, to the project construction and project development, right? And then hopefully you have the, cutting, the ribbon cutting ceremony. All take the time, all take the focus of the human aspect of it. That's important.
And Roger, I know you were on our last webinar about making a stakeholder matrix, so you're already a pro on this. But for those of you who are just joining this webinar, we wanted to also show you an example of how you can take your certain stakeholder groups and then overlay the issues, the environmental and cultural considerations and issues that may come up for them, the concerns that they might have. And this goes back to, I know our friends at Great and Rancheria had to hop off, but also Wendell was referencing the ranchers and the property owners who were going to have a substation that was going to cross their land. You can certainly build a matrix like this one that we're sharing with you, and you're welcome to email us after the webinar. We can send you a blank one so you don't have to reinvent it. Our purpose is to make it easy and fast for you to get that rack up of who's impacted and what the issues might be that they're concerned about. And then that last column is communication. So how do folks like to be communicated with, not just about these issues, but about the project generally? Sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think as we're wrapping up on our last slide, I think Kit was starting to do that. We just have a little bit under 7 minutes, so she'll click on that last slide for wrapping it up. Oh, I don't know, Kit, if you want to sort of close on that, but just personally, thank you, everybody, for staying on for the time. We know time is precious in your work day. So thank you for that. And I'll let Kit wrap up, and we will be having the final webinar 4 that will be coming up, and we'll close that out.
And that's April 7th. Maybe it'll be a little warmer in Maryland by April 7th for you, Michelle. So really what we talked about today, considering the environmental and cultural impacts on tribal lands, it's unique for each tribe, as we all know, right? Tribes are unique. They have unique culture and history and location and needs. And so makes it hard to have a cookie cutter approach, but we tried to give you some ways to organize the information about your stakeholders and about the environmental impacts, so you can sort of have them in front of you and deal with them in a more specific and disciplined way. And then site selection is key. I'm not saying anything y'all don't know, but knowing what the environmental and cultural impacts might be of certain sites is key. Thinking about alternatives as you're thinking about site selection, as you're thinking about project design, and then connecting and considering your stakeholders along with the environmental and cultural issues. And Allison, thank you for the thank you. Katrina, you're so welcome. We're so glad to be with you. And Barbara said you pointed out some key considerations that need to be incorporated into an implementation plan. Thank you. You get an A+ for the day, because that is exactly what we were trying to do. So I'm glad that you got that. And then Roger, you got 17 inches of snow in eastern North Carolina. I don't know that that's normal for all of y'all in northern North Carolina, but that sounds like a lot to me from Los Angeles. 17 inches of snow sounds like a lot. Michelle, any last thoughts?
No, like I said, thank you for joining. I think there was a link of a feedback that Brooke put in. We always really, I think the Native Learning Center really appreciates that. It shows that the content, it shows that we as instructors, we really try to meet that level that the Native Learning Center desires. And so those types of forms are very helpful for feedback. If you have the time to do that, that would be great.
All right. So here, if you need additional help, if you'd like some blank matrices or tables, here's our email. Happy to help you however we can to make what you're doing a little bit easier and a little bit more intentional, because what you're doing is hard. Don't let anybody tell you different. It is. It's really hard. Engaging with stakeholders and looking at cultural considerations. These are challenging things to do.
So I think, Brooke, we'll hand it over to you for the last closing, as you normally do.
Okay. Thank you so much, Michelle and Kit. I hope everybody will tune in for part 4. I'm going to remind you of one in just a moment here. So we'd appreciate it if you did today's webinar feedback survey. They already referenced that, and the link is in the chat. Just helps Native Learning Center know what is working well, what we can improve upon, and we do share the feedback with our instructors. So it helps everybody all around. It is anonymous, so feel free to be candid. You don't have to worry about your name or email being connected to it. I'm the one who pulls them. I get a spreadsheet with numbers. There's no other identifying information. And I hope you can join us for our next webinar that's upcoming. That's going to be on February 5th, conflict resolution, getting along in the workplace. That is part of that leadership series with Dr. Latchford. Same time as always, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. if you are in Alaska. We hope you can check out our other recorded webinars. They are on our YouTube channel. There's a whole playlist called the Catheta Webinar Archive. It goes back about 2 years. It's a great resource. YouTube is free for you to use. And we have a lot of different topics on there. And if you ever need help finding something specific, you can always reach out to me by email. I'll put my email in the chat. There we go.
You know, we don't want any comments about our hair, our glasses, or anything like that. Okay. I'm just checking with you all.
In the survey, you only want people to comment on content.
Content, but yeah.
Like the content. There will not be a question about your physical appearance.
Or the fact that I'm in my kitchen and you can see my fridge. So humor, yes, all of that. All of that.
And have a good time. So thank you, everybody. Such a pleasure. Yes. Join us for the last round.
We hope you can check out our other upcoming training events. We post about them to our social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And if you are a podcast fan, you can check out our in-house produced podcast, the Hope of Thing, a Native American podcast. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts, or we do record the videos with our special guests, and you can check that out on our YouTube channel as well. Just so you guys know, part 4 of Michelle and Kit's series is going to be happening April 7th. So just be on the lookout for April 7th. So a little while from now. But otherwise, that is all we have for you folks today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope y'all have a fantastic rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Brooke. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, everybody. Have
We'll
a
talk
great
soon,
day.
everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Turn the recording off.